Family is often just a glamorous lie wrapped in expensive paper. For 32 years, I was the stain on their perfect portrait, the daughter hidden away during lavish weddings. They banned me, terrified my soil-stained hands would scratch their polished facade. But they forgot that people who work the earth know how to plant seeds that uproot everything. When my big day arrived, the price for those withheld invitations cost them more than their entire fortune. Hello, listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being here with me today. Unfortunately, our channel has recently been demonetized by YouTube, leaving us with absolutely zero budget to keep operating. If you find yourself enjoying today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our channel has the budget to pay our hardworking team, allowing them to cover their living expenses and continue creating these stories to serve you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code directly on your screen, or by clicking the PayPal link located in the description or the pinned comments of this video. My name is Faith Berry. I am 32 years old, and I work as an agricultural engineer and a landscape designer based in Denver, Colorado. I was born into a wealthy white family entirely consumed by their obsession with elite social status and high-stakes corporate networking. To my parents, people were judged not by their character, but by the exclusivity of their country club memberships and the influence attached to their last names. The dividing line between myself and the rest of my family was glaring from the very beginning. My two older sisters, Harper and Sloane, were the undisputed pride of the Berry household. They were certified social media queens, both holding incredibly lucrative positions in elite public relations firms. Their lives were a carefully curated feed of designer handbags, vintage champagne brunches, and high-profile charity galas. They knew exactly how to angle their faces to catch the perfect paparazzi lighting, how to smile warmly without ever wrinkling their foreheads, and how to charm billionaire executives at exactly the right moment. I chose an entirely different path. I eagerly traded designer stilettos for heavy steel-toed boots, and custom blazers for worn-out, comfortable denim jeans. I worked for a highly respected landscape architecture firm called Axiom Dynamics. My days were spent with my hands buried deep in the soil, analyzing the earth and designing sustainable green spaces. I smelled of damp earth, fresh rain, and cedar wood, while my sisters always smelled of expensive Chanel perfume and calculated ambition. I loved my life and felt genuine pride in my work, but to my family, my existence was a muddy footprint on their pristine white carpets. I was the anomaly they could not control, and therefore, the embarrassing secret they had to hide. The devastating depth of their shame became painfully clear when Harper got married. It was an outrageously lavish affair hosted at a sprawling French-style chateau that cost more per hour than most people make in an entire year. The guest list was a who is who of the corporate elite. As the preparations reached a frantic fever pitch, I waited patiently for my invitation. I waited to be asked to try on a bridesmaid dress, or at least a simple dress to attend as a regular guest. That invitation never arrived. When I finally gathered the courage to confront Harper in the grand foyer of our parents' estate, she did not even look slightly apologetic. She sighed heavily, adjusting her perfectly styled hair, and delivered the blow without a single flinch. "Your rough hands and poverty-stricken style will ruin my magazine frames. Faith, you just do not fit the aesthetic we are going for. This is a high-profile event, not a local farmer's market." Those words hit me harder than a physical strike. I stood there, swallowing the heavy lump forming in my throat, watching her walk away. I was not banned because I had done something wrong. I was banned simply for being exactly who I was. 2 years later, the second shock arrived when Sloane got married. If Harper's rejection was a swift slap to the face, Sloane's was a slow, suffocating poison. There was no confrontation this time. There were no harsh words spoken in the foyer. There was only a dead, deafening silence. I was not even notified that she was engaged. I found out on a random Tuesday evening, sitting completely alone in my apartment after an exhausting day at the greenhouse. I opened my phone and scrolled through Instagram. Suddenly, there it was, a professionally edited photograph of Sloane in a breathtaking gown. Standing next to her new husband, beside them stood Harper, my mother, and my father, all beaming with picture-perfect joy. My breath hitched as my eyes drifted down to the comments section. Right at the top, pinned for absolutely everyone to see, was a comment written by my mother. "The complete family is all here. My heart is so full." The complete family, those 4 words burned themselves violently into my retinas. In that single sentence, my mother had publicly erased my existence. I was not just uninvited, I was completely unacknowledged as a human being. Yet, the most tragic part was my own reaction. I did not cry. My tear ducts felt as dry as the Colorado dirt in the middle of summer. Instead of righteous anger, a toxic wave of misplaced guilt washed over me. I somehow convinced myself it was my fault. I told myself that if I just tried a little bit harder, they would eventually realize my worth. So, I swallowed my pride. I spent 72 straight hours meticulously crafting an intricate, living terrarium encased in custom-blown glass as a wedding gift for Sloane. It was a masterpiece that would have easily sold for thousands of dollars at a high-end botanical gallery. I shipped it directly to her new luxury penthouse. I did the exact same thing for Harper on all of her anniversaries. I continued sending expensive, handmade gifts, pouring my soul into every creation, desperately hoping a tangible piece of my love would thaw their frozen hearts. I was trapped inside an agonizing psychological loop. I was starving for the warmth of my family, desperately offering them the best pieces of myself, only to have those pieces silently tossed into the trash. Every ignored text message, every unacknowledged gift, every major holiday spent completely alone in my apartment chipped away at my spirit, but I kept crawling back, offering my bruised heart to the very people who took immense pleasure in stomping on it. They did not need to abuse me physically. Their weapon of choice was silence. And that deafening silence was slowly breaking me apart, leaving me gasping for air in a family portrait that had mercilessly cut me out years ago. The Sterling Hotel stood as a towering monolith of absurd wealth in the absolute center of the city. When my parents announced that their 35th wedding anniversary gala would be held in the Grand Sapphire Ballroom, their social circles buzzed with frenzied anticipation. To my utter shock, an email actually arrived in my inbox regarding the event, but my heart sank the moment I opened the attachment. It was not an embossed invitation trimmed in gold foil. It was a standard vendor access contract. I was summoned, not as a beloved daughter to celebrate a milestone, but as the hired floral decorator. I was strictly instructed to enter through the loading dock at the back of the building and to confine my operations entirely to the service basement. They did not want me sitting at their table. They simply wanted my labor while keeping me safely out of sight. Still blinded by my desperate, pathetic need for their validation, I accepted the terms. I saw an opportunity, a final, monumental gamble to win their affection. I decided to build a floral archway so breathtaking, so undeniably magnificent, that it would force them to acknowledge my talent and, by extension, my worth. I stayed awake for 3 consecutive nights. I worked for 72 grueling hours straight, cutting, wiring, and bleeding for people who barely acknowledged my existence. My fingers were blistered and wrapped in layers of rough athletic tape. I sourced the rarest midnight orchids, imported thousands of stems of cascading white wisteria, and wove them into a massive, towering 12-foot structure. If I had billed a corporate client for this exact piece, the invoice would have easily exceeded $50,000. But this was my secret gift to them, a towering, living monument of a daughter's desperate affection. On the afternoon of the gala, my crew and I carefully transported the massive structure up the heavy freight elevator. We positioned it right at the grand entrance of the ballroom, just moments before the heavy oak doors were scheduled to open. The sheer scale and beauty of the piece instantly transformed the room. It was nothing short of magnificent. Exhausted, covered in sticky floral sap, and wearing my dirty black canvas work apron, I realized I could not stay out in the open. The elite guests were already arriving. So, I slipped quietly behind a heavy, velvet-lined folding screen positioned near the entryway. I just wanted to see their faces. I wanted to witness the exact second my mother laid eyes on my creation and finally felt a surge of genuine pride for her youngest child. The sharp clacking of designer heels echoed loudly on the polished marble floor. My mother approached the entrance, flanked by my father and a tightly knit group of high-level investors. The air around them grew thick with the overpowering scent of their expensive colognes and perfumes. I held my breath, my heart pounding violently against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Margaret, this floral arrangement is absolutely extraordinary," one of the female executives gasped, reaching out to gently touch a delicate orchid petal. "I have never seen anything quite like this design. Who did you hire for this?" I smiled warmly behind the dark screen. This was it. This was my moment of redemption. My mother let out a practiced, sophisticated laugh. "Oh, thank you, darling." She projected her voice, ensuring everyone in her immediate radius could hear her clearly. "This floral arch was designed by an exclusive artisan. I had to fly all the way to Milan just to secure him for the evening. He only works with European royalty, so it cost an absolute fortune. But for our 35th anniversary, we simply had to have the best." The hopeful smile froze and then violently shattered on my face. Milan, an exclusive artisan, a fortune. She was standing mere feet away from me, confidently claiming that my blood, my sweat, and my sleepless nights were the work of a phantom Italian designer. She was deliberately stripping my identity from my own masterpiece just to elevate her fabricated social standing. Before I could even process the crushing, suffocating weight of that lie, another voice chimed in. It was a wealthy corporate partner from New York. "By the way, Richard," the man said, addressing my father, "where is your youngest Faith? Is it I do not see her name on the seating chart at the head table?" A heavy, agonizing silence hung in the air for a fraction of a second. Then, my father chuckled. It was a cold, dismissive sound that scraped mercilessly against my eardrums. "Oh, she's busy with some plants out in the suburbs," my father replied smoothly, his tone dripping with profound condescension. "She is not suited for this high society world. You know how it is. Some people just prefer to play in the dirt. We decided it was best not to overwhelm her with an event of this caliber. Honestly, putting her in a room with $1 billion of net worth would just make everyone uncomfortable. Let her have her little garden projects." My lungs completely stopped working. The solid ground beneath my steel-toed boots felt like it was instantly crumbling into fine dust. In that exact devastating moment, the phantom cord connecting me to these people violently snapped in two. My final, desperate attempt to earn their love had not just been rejected, it had been hijacked, rebranded, and weaponized against me. I was not a family member. I was not even a tolerated outcast. I was a stain they were actively scrubbing away, a dark secret they had to bury under pathetic lies about European artisans and suburban dirt. All my desperate efforts, all my expensive handmade gifts, all my silent suffering shattered into a million jagged pieces on that marble floor. Suddenly, there was no anger left in my exhausted body. There was no sadness. There was only a chilling, absolute clarity. I reached up with trembling fingers and unclipped the cheap plastic vendor badge from my chest. The name tag that read my name, followed by the words, "Floral Staff," felt like a sick, twisted joke. I untied the thick knot of my canvas apron and let it fall to the ground. I left my masterpiece standing there, a beautiful monument to a family that simply never existed. I pushed open the heavy metal service doors and stepped out into the dark, empty alleyway behind the hotel. A harsh, freezing sleet was falling from the black sky, cutting against my bare face like tiny, icy blades. But I did not feel the freezing cold. I walked toward the glowing streetlights, leaving the grand ballroom, the fake Italian orchids, and my incredibly toxic bloodline far behind me in the darkness. I took a deep, shuddering breath of the freezing air and made a silent, unbreakable vow to the night sky. I would never, ever look back. 2 full years of absolute unbroken silence followed that freezing night in the alleyway. I changed my phone number, relocated my life to a completely different district, and surgically severed every single digital and physical tie to my bloodline. The void they left behind was not empty. It became a massive reservoir of raw, untapped ambition. All the agonizing energy I had once wasted trying to win their worthless validation was redirected entirely into the soil. I took out a massive small business loan of $250,000, putting everything I owned on the line, and founded my own ecological landscaping firm. I practically lived inside my greenhouse for the first 18 months. I worked 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. The earth rewarded my dedication in ways my family never did. Within 24 months, my small, struggling startup exploded into a highly profitable, multi-million-dollar ecological empire. My firm specialized in sustainable, large-scale urban green spaces. I transformed from an unseen floral worker hiding in a basement into a highly sought-after chief executive officer. My company was soon valued at over $7 million, managing a dedicated crew of 50 employees and securing massive municipal contracts across the entire state. It was exactly at the height of this professional expansion that Julian Vance walked into my life. Julian was a notoriously private, intensely powerful commercial real estate developer headquartered in Chicago. He was the kind of quietly dangerous man who owned entire city blocks and controlled billions of dollars in assets, yet intentionally kept his face strictly out of the financial magazines. His firm was in the process of constructing a massive, eco-friendly corporate campus on the outskirts of the city, a project with a budget exceeding $150 million. After reviewing dozens of proposals, he personally selected my company to design and execute the surrounding landscape architecture. Our first meeting was far from a traditional romantic collision. It was a rigorous, 3-hour negotiation inside a sterile, brightly lit conference room. I did not wear a tailored blazer or a silk blouse. I arrived in my standard heavy denim work pants and steel-toed boots, carrying rolled-up blueprints covered in dirt smudges. Julian sat across from me in a custom-tailored suit, his sharp eyes evaluating my every move, but he did not bat an eye at my rough appearance or the absolute lack of designer labels. What captivated him was the fierce, uncompromising way I defended the biological integrity of the topsoil. He watched with intense fascination as I completely refused to utilize cheaper, invasive plant species just to save a few $1,000s on the budget. He listened to me speak passionately about complex geological stratifications and advanced water retention systems with a level of profound respect I had never experienced from any human being, let alone a man wielding his level of corporate dominance. Our relationship grew naturally from that incredibly solid foundation. It was wonderfully slow, remarkably steady, and beautifully practical. There were no exhausting mind games, no silent treatments, and absolutely no emotional manipulation. We bonded over late-night coffee discussing commercial zoning laws, and weekend mornings hiking through untouched nature reserves. Julian was a man who spoke through decisive actions rather than empty promises. It was the calm, grounded love of two seasoned adults who had already fought their own separate battles and were simply looking for a sturdy, safe place to rest their heavy armor. When the proposal finally happened, it was as raw, messy, and real as our entire relationship. There was no hidden photographer waiting at a 5-star restaurant. There was no ostentatious, flashy diamond ring hidden inside a crystal glass of vintage champagne. It happened on a random Tuesday afternoon, right in the exact center of our biggest active construction site. A sudden violent torrential downpour had quickly turned the recently excavated ground into a thick, treacherous pool of heavy mud. I was covered head to toe in freezing grime, shouting loud instructions over the deafening roar of heavy excavators, desperately trying to secure a fragile root system from washing away. Julian drove up in his truck and walked right out into the middle of the deluge. He ruined his incredibly expensive leather dress shoes without a single second of hesitation, sinking deep into the slop. He gently grabbed my wet shoulders, turned me around to face him, and reached inside his soaked wool coat. He pulled out a thick, waterproof legal folder. Inside that folder was not a piece of jewelry, but a legally binding deed of ownership. He had just finalized the outright purchase of a sprawling 300-acre old-growth forest bordering the northern mountains. It was the exact, pristine piece of land I had casually mentioned loving over 6 months prior. He bought it in full and placed the deed entirely in my name. "Marry me," Julian said smoothly, his deep voice easily cutting through the chaotic sound of the driving rain and the roaring machinery. "Let us build something together that actually lasts." I stood there, looking up at this incredible, unshakable man who loved me exactly as I was, dirt and all. I smiled warmly through the freezing rain and told him yes, immediately. We began mapping out our wedding. It was not going to be a sprawling media circus. We planned an intimately small, heavily guarded, closed-door ceremony, yet, funded by Julian's immense resources and my own significant wealth, it would possess the quiet, untouchable, and devastating elegance of true, ultra-rich class. The name Julian Vance was not just a name, it was a heavily guarded institution. In the insular, hyper-competitive circles of high society real estate and private equity, a wedding involving Julian was the absolute equivalent of a royal coronation. Within exactly 48 hours of our engagement becoming quietly known among his inner circle, our upcoming nuptials transformed into the most intensely sought-after social event on the entire West Coast. We did not issue a single press release, yet the invisible telegraph of the ultra-rich was buzzing with frantic speculation. Naturally, it did not take long for the shockwave to violently strike the pristine shores of the Barry family estate. Through their desperate networking channels, my parents and my 2 perfectly manicured sisters finally discovered the truth. The very same daughter they had shoved into a service basement, the one they mocked for playing in the dirt, was now officially engaged to a legitimate, self-made billionaire. The delicious irony of the situation was that Julian Vance was the exact elusive titan my father's corporate development firm had been desperately, and unsuccessfully, trying to secure a meeting with for the past 5 years. Their reaction was as predictable as it was utterly shameless. I had not spoken a single word to my mother in over 730 days, but my inbox suddenly lit up on a Thursday morning. It was a massive, sprawling email from her. The subject line read, "To my beautiful bride," dripping with a sickeningly sweet, fabricated maternal warmth that made my stomach physically turn. She wrote paragraph after paragraph about how she wept tears of joy upon hearing the news, how family is the most important thing in the universe, and how they had all missed me so terribly. She conveniently erased every ounce of the psychological abuse they had inflicted on me, but the true masterpiece of her audacity was located at the very bottom of the email. Attached was a meticulously formatted spreadsheet containing exactly 40 names. It was a comprehensive list of elite corporate partners, high-level investors, and political contacts. She explicitly stated that as the mother of the bride, she required me to formally invite every single person on that list to secure vital business interests for my father. She did not ask. She demanded it under the incredibly thin veil of family duty. Reading that email, I sat in my spacious corner office overlooking the city, holding my coffee cup. I expected to feel a surge of boiling rage. I expected to feel the old familiar sting of rejection. Instead, I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, overwhelming sense of pity. Their greed was a bottomless, starving black hole. They were willing to completely rewrite history and humiliate themselves just for a sliver of proximity to Julian's immense power. I did not draft a long, emotional reply. I did not demand an apology or list my grievances. I hit the reply button and typed out exactly 2 sentences. "Just like you all told me, I know perfectly well that I do not fit in with your high society crowd. This wedding strictly bans the entire Barry family, so do not even try to attend." I hit send and permanently blocked her email address. When I showed the email thread to Julian that evening, his jaw tightened in that quiet, dangerous way that always commanded absolute authority in boardrooms. He completely supported my decision without a single second of hesitation. To guarantee my peace of mind, he immediately diverted a massive sum of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, to retain a private security contracting firm. They were not standard event bouncers. He hired a highly specialized tactical team comprised entirely of former elite military operators. They were given a digital blacklist containing high-resolution photographs of my parents and my two sisters. We constructed an impenetrable fortress around our wedding day, ensuring that absolutely no one lacking a heavily encrypted digital invitation would ever get within a single mile of the venue. The power dynamic had completely shifted, and I was finally the one holding the keys to the gate. The rejection email was the spark that ignited a massive, highly coordinated digital riot. My family, having been denied access to the ultimate symbol of high society status, lost their collective minds within 72 hours of my brief response. Sloan and Harper weaponized their elite public relations expertise to exact their revenge. They launched a vicious, highly orchestrated smear campaign across every major social media platform available. Suddenly, my face was plastered all over TikTok and Instagram. They posted dozens of highly edited videos of themselves sitting in perfectly lit, luxurious living rooms, wiping away fake tears with expensive tissues. Our sweet younger sister has been entirely brainwashed by a dangerous, controlling individual. Sloan sobbed into the camera during a live stream that quickly garnered over 2 million views. She has completely cut ties with the family who raised her and loved her unconditionally. We are so terrified for her safety. Harper quickly followed suit, publishing lengthy, emotionally manipulative articles on various blogs, claiming that sudden proximity to extreme wealth had completely corrupted my morals. They expertly crafted a flawless narrative where they were the tragic, loving family desperately trying to save a lost, ungrateful daughter from a ruthless billionaire. The comment sections were flooded with thousands of strangers sending them prayers, while simultaneously sending me hundreds of hateful, threatening messages. While my sisters waged a psychological war online, my father launched a vicious, calculated corporate offensive. He leveraged his extensive network of high-powered executives to squeeze my landscaping empire. He began making aggressive phone calls to my most reliable suppliers, including the wholesale nurseries, the heavy machinery rental companies, and the bulk soil providers. He threatened to immediately pull hundreds of thousands of dollars in funding and completely blacklist them from his own highly lucrative corporate development projects if they continued doing business with my firm. He wanted to financially suffocate me. He believed that applying enough monetary pressure would force me to crawl back on my hands and knees, begging for mercy and offering him a wedding invitation as a pathetic peace offering to save my business. My executive team was absolutely terrified by the sudden onslaught. The head of my public relations department begged me to release an official statement, to leak the horrible things my family had done to me over the years, or to at least issue a formal cease and desist order to stop the digital bleeding, but I firmly refused. The greatest weapon against narcissists is not angry retaliation. It is a complete and utter vacuum of attention. I chose to deploy the absolute devastating art of silence. I did not post a single defense. I did not engage with the furious comments or the articles. I simply let the public storm rage. I allowed them to play the flawless victims on the internet, knowing perfectly well that every single tear they shed and every lie they typed was just them digging their own graves a little bit deeper. Meanwhile, Julian, operating entirely in the shadows of the corporate world, quietly stepped in. He offered exclusive, multi-million-dollar development contracts to any supplier my father had threatened. Within 48 hours, my father's desperate attempt at corporate sabotage completely collapsed, leaving him powerless and confused by my total lack of response. The weeks passed in a blur, and the day of our wedding finally arrived. It was held inside a colossal, state-of-the-art botanical greenhouse that I had spent the last 8 months meticulously designing specifically for this exact occasion. The towering structure was a breathtaking cathedral constructed of polished steel and reinforced glass, nestled deep within a private, heavily wooded estate far away from the city. From the outside, however, It looked like a highly classified military installation preparing for a siege. True to his word, Julian had deployed a massive, uncompromising security presence. The entire perimeter was secured by high-grade temporary fencing, and dozens of heavily armed private contractors patrolled the access roads in unmarked vehicles. There was a single, heavily fortified checkpoint located exactly half a mile from the actual venue. The guards operated with strict, absolute orders, absolutely no digital clearance, absolutely no entry, regardless of who was asking. Stepping through the heavy glass doors of the greenhouse, the sheer insanity of the outside world instantly evaporated. The contrast was absolutely staggering. While the internet burned with vicious rumors and my family fumed in their mansion, the atmosphere inside was a sanctuary of profound, untouched peace. Thousands of blooming white lilies, vibrant blue orchids, and lush tropical ferns cascaded down from the massive steel beams, filling the warm air with a rich, intoxicating fragrance. There were exactly 80 guests seated in a perfect circular arrangement around the altar. There were no fake corporate smiles, no strategic networking, and absolutely no strangers evaluating my worth based on the designer label of my dress. These were my loyal crew members who had worked in the freezing mud beside me for years, Julian's oldest, most trusted friends, and the dedicated partners who had stood by us when things were difficult. Looking out at those 80 smiling faces, I felt a deep, overwhelming wave of true, genuine happiness. For the very first time in my 32 years of life, I was finally, completely surrounded by my real family. The string quartet was just beginning to play the delicate opening notes of the bridal march when the heavy two-way radio on the lead security director's hip crackled violently to life. He stepped quickly toward Julian, whispering something urgently into his ear. Julian's expression remained perfectly still, but his sharp eyes locked onto mine from across the floral-lined aisle. We knew instantly what had happened. They had actually done it. Despite the strict blockades, despite the massive humiliation they had already suffered online, my family had somehow found a way to crash the front gates. I did not panic. I simply nodded at Julian, picked up the heavy train of my custom silk gown, and walked right past the altar. The guests murmured in confusion, but the 80 people who truly knew me stayed firmly in their seats. They knew I was finally going to finish this. We rode a heavily armored security cart down the half-mile gravel driveway to the main checkpoint. Through the reinforced steel mesh of the towering gates, the scene was absolutely chaotic. My mother was gripping the cold metal bars, weeping hysterically, performing the role of a devastated, heartbroken parent with breathtaking precision. My two sisters were standing right behind her, aggressively pointing their phone cameras at the stoic security guards, desperately trying to record a viral video of the brutal mercenaries keeping a loving family apart on a wedding day. But the real strategy was standing silently off to the side. My father had brought 3 older men dressed in impeccably tailored suits. I recognized them immediately from the front pages of the financial journals. They were 3 of the most powerful corporate investors in the United States. My father had promised them unparalleled access to Julian Vance, using my wedding as a twisted networking event to finalize a massive 9-figure corporate merger. He was banking heavily on the fact that I would be too embarrassed, too afraid of causing a public scandal in front of such important billionaires, to turn them away. He thought he could corner me into compliance. "Let my daughter go," my mother screamed into the crisp evening air, her voice cracking perfectly for the recording devices. "You monsters are tearing a mother and her child apart." As I stepped out of the cart, the heavy silk of my dress rustling softly against the gravel, they all froze. My father's face immediately transformed from a look of panicked desperation into a sickeningly smug, triumphant grin. He puffed out his chest, stepping forward to proudly present his 3 billionaire guests, fully expecting me to bow my head, open the gates, and play the role of the obedient daughter to save face. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words never came out. Julian stepped out from behind me, casually adjusting his expensive silver cufflinks. He did not look angry. He looked entirely amused. He walked right up to the heavy steel gate, completely ignoring my father, and smiled warmly at the three powerful investors. Arthur, William, David, Julian said smoothly, his deep voice carrying perfectly through the metal mesh. I am so glad you gentlemen could make it out here tonight. I told you the bait would work perfectly. The three billionaires broke into genuine, relaxed laughter. You were right on the money. Julian, the tallest investor, Arthur, chuckled heartily. He brought us right to your front door, exactly as you predicted. My father's smug smile instantly collapsed. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. He whipped his head back and forth between Julian and the men he was desperately trying to impress, his brain struggling to compute the sheer magnitude of his miscalculation. These were not his targets. They were Julian's longtime, fiercely loyal business partners. Julian had personally briefed them on the entire situation weeks in advance, and they had happily played along just to spring the trap. What is going on here? My father stammered, his voice trembling violently. I did not give him the satisfaction of an argument. I did not shed a single tear, and I did not raise my voice. I simply pulled my phone from the hidden pocket of my gown. I handed a small auxiliary cable to the head of security, who plugged it directly into the massive public address system mounted on the concrete pillars of the gate. I tapped the screen. Suddenly, my mother's voice, amplified to a deafening volume, blasted through the entire valley. It was the recording I had quietly captured on my phone 2 years ago while standing hidden behind that velvet screen at the Sterling Hotel. This floral arch was designed by an exclusive artisan. Her recorded voice echoed sharply, dripping with elite snobbery. I had to fly all the way to Milan just to secure him. Oh, Faith. She is just busy with some plants out in the suburbs. She is not suited for this high society world. My mother physically recoiled from the gates as if she had been struck by lightning. Her hands dropped to her sides, her jaw unhinged in absolute horror. But I was not finished. I swiped to the next audio file and hit play. This time, it was a voicemail my father had drunkenly left on an old business associate's phone just 3 nights ago, which Julian's private intelligence team had easily intercepted. I do not care about the brat. My father's slurred, incredibly greedy voice boomed from the massive speakers for everyone to hear. I just need to get past those security dogs, get Arthur and William in front of Vance, and secure the funding. Once the ink is dry, she can go back to playing in the dirt for all I care. The silence that followed the recording was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. The three billionaire investors stood staring at my father with expressions of pure, unadulterated disgust. Arthur shook his head slowly. Richard, you are a pathetic excuse for a businessman, and an even worse excuse for a father, Arthur said coldly, his voice dripping with venom. Our firm is completely pulling out of the downtown development project. Every single term sheet we have on the table is officially shredded. We are completely done here. My father let out a choked, desperate gasp, reaching out to grab Arthur's arm, but the powerful man shoved him away with fierce contempt. Sloan and Harper stood completely paralyzed, their phones dropping from their shaking hands. Their carefully constructed digital masks of loving, heartbroken sisters had just been violently ripped away in front of the most powerful financial titans in the country. There was no public relations spin that could ever fix this level of catastrophic, career-ending humiliation. The lead security guard stepped forward, resting his hand casually on his tactical belt. You have exactly 60 seconds to vacate this private road before I have you all arrested for criminal trespassing, he stated flatly. I did not stay to watch them scramble back into their rented vehicles in utter disgrace. I turned my back on them for the final time. Julian wrapped his warm arm tightly around my waist, and we walked back to the cart. As we drove back up the winding, tree-lined path, the heavy steel gates slammed shut behind us with a loud, satisfying boom, permanently locking the toxic debris of my past on the outside. When we finally stepped back inside the warm, fragrant air of the greenhouse, our 80 true friends erupted into massive cheers. I walked straight onto the beautiful floral dance floor, pressing my head against Julian's chest as the music swelled around us. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, inhaling the sweet scent of the blooming orchids. I finally felt a profound, absolute peace. It was a beautiful, unshakable peace, bought and paid for by my own perfectly timed, unapologetic ruthlessness. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to my story until the very end. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's story and want to help support our channel, please consider donating just $1. Your support means the absolute world to us. It allows us to pay our hardworking staff so they can feed their families and continue creating even better stories for you to enjoy. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code right here on the screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the description or the pinned comments. Thank you again, and please take care of yourselves.